Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're back again. We're going to start this is basically a preview of Unit 5, which is rational expressions. We're going to be reviewing something that you talked about in your earlier algebra class. And so this should not be that new a concept. However, there will be some things that we need to revisit and remind yourself of. And I may teach you in a little different way, but again, as always, if you find another way that works better for you, I'm fine with that. But this is just one way that I teach my students, and we go from there. All right, first of all, we're going to do three kinds of factoring. The first kind we're going to do is greatest common factor. Well, actually, four kinds, I'm sorry. So this video will be on greatest common factor, and then there'll be maybe one or two more videos. We'll see how time goes. But anyway, so greatest common factor, this is basically, and you'll follow along on your note sheet and complete the notes as I've detailed in the video. So the greatest common factor is the biggest number that you can divide into both of your numbers. And since we're dealing with algebra, it's also going to be the variable with the smallest exponent that's in every expression, all right, or every term. So let's start off with our examples down here at the bottom. We're not going to worry about the top ones. So we're going to come down here to the bottom, which says factoring polynomials with GCF. All right. So let's look at this first example here. All right. So we got 4 and 6. So the biggest number that's in both 4 and 6 is going to be 2. Now that's the biggest number that we can divide into both of those and get smaller numbers that are whole numbers. They're not decimals or fractions. So what we do is we do our parentheses, we put our 2 here, and then we move on to our letters. So we did our number, now we're going to our letters. Now we have X and Y. Now X is not the same thing as Y, and Y is not the same thing as X. So we have to leave those. There's no common letter factor. It's in both terms. Now the letter has to be in both terms in order for it to be a greatest common factor. All right, so we're going to divide 4 by 2 and get 2x, and then 6 by 2 is going to be 3y. And so we have successfully factored using the greatest common factor. Now that is if we're doing with numbers and letters. I always do my numbers first and then come and do my letters, but however, if you want to do your letter first and then come back to your number, that's fine. It'll work out the same way. All right, let's go to our second example. All right, so we have 6x to the third, 9x to the second, plus 12x. All right, so we have 3 numbers here. The first example, we only had 2 numbers. Here we have 3 numbers. So the greatest common factor will never be bigger than the smallest number. So let's try 6. If I divide 6 by 6, I get 1. If I divide 12 by 6, I get 2. However, when I get to 9 divided by 6 is not going to give us a whole number. So that can't be the biggest number that we can divide to all of them. So that's my technique. I always check to see if the smaller or smallest number can divide into the bigger numbers. The next thing I do is I start at the very bottom. Now 1, for our purposes, positive 1 will never be a greatest common factor. Negative 1, yes, not positive 1. But we'll get to those problems later. All right. So next number we want to try after positive 1 is positive 2. All right. So I look at 6 divided by 2. Doesn't it give us 3? All right. What about 9 divided by 2? Okay, unfortunately, that's going to give us a fraction or a decimal, so we can stop there. The greatest common factor you have to be able to divide it into all 3 numbers, or however many numbers you have. So we can stop with 9. We can't go any further. All right, next, let's go to 3. That's the next number that is the biggest number that will go into all 3 numbers. All right, so now we're going to divide 6 by 3. That gives us 2. Okay, so far we're doing good, or doing well, rather. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. Okay, so we got 2 out of 3 so far. And then lastly, 12 divided by 3, that's positive 4. All right, so that is our greatest common factor. It is the one number I can divide into all of my numbers and get a whole number answer. All right, so we're going to put a 3 right here for right now. So now we got to look at our variables. We have x to the third, x to the second, x to the 1. Now we're dealing with variables. If it's the same letter in each of your terms, but different exponents, you always want the one with the smallest exponent, and you'll see why in just a few moments. It's easier to take a smaller number away from a bigger number than it is to take a bigger number from a smaller number. Okay, so if I have 4 apples, I can't take 5 apples out of it, okay? So out of x to the third, x to the second, and x to the 1, the smallest one is x to the 1. So that's going to be our greatest common factor in terms of our letters. All right? So give me a second to erase my little marks here because I got to come back and do some other stuff. All right? So now let's go to now we do our parentheses. And now we're going to divide 6 by 3, and that gives us 2. All right? Make sure you're following along on your paper. That's why I left the paper for you to write along on this. All right? Now, x to the 1, which is right here, we're now going to say we have x to the third, so that means we have 3 x's. If I take away 1, I'm going to be 3 minus 1. That's going to give me 2 x's, or x to the second. All right? Negative 9 divided by 3 is going to be negative 3. Then we go to our letter. If I have 2 x's, or x to the second, and I subtract 1 from the x to the 1, that actually winds up being x to the 1. Okay? And then 12 divided by 3 is 4. All right? And if I have 1x, meaning x to the 1, and I take away 1x to the 1, I'm left with nothing except the number. So now we can just close our parentheses, and now we have factored out the greatest common factor. All right? So that is how we deal with 2 terms, a binomial, and 3 terms, a trinomial. All right? So I'm going to do a couple of these practice problems, but I have a Google form for you to complete practice problems on, so I want you to work on those. All right? So we're going to do practice problems 1 and 2. All right? So let's look at 1. All right? So I look at my numbers. 8 is smaller than 16, so let's see if that's the greatest common factor. Okay, 16 divided by 8, isn't that 2? All right, so there's our greatest common factor. So again, it's just that simple, guys and ladies. Look at the smaller number, see if it's a factor. If it's a factor, you're done. If it's not, then start with 2 and go up if you want to. All right, so now we're going to put 8 out here. So let's go to our letters. So I have an x to the second, x to the 1. So I have 2 x's. I have the same letter in both terms. So now we want the smallest one, which in this case is x to the 1. Okay? It will not always be x to the 1. Sometimes it might be x to the 2 or y to the 2 or whatever else. But in this case, the smallest exponent is x to the 1. All right? So we'll come here again. 16 divided by 8, isn't that 2? We just said that. And if I have 2 x's and I take away the x to the 1 or 1x, I'll left with 1x. Or x to the 1. Then I come over here, negative 8 divided by 8 is negative 1. All right? And if I only have 1x, and I take away that 1x, then that's all I have left. All right? So we factored practice problem number 1. Make sure you write this down, please. And feel free to stop the video if I'm going too fast, to catch up, and then make sure you have this, because these are your notes. I'm not there in person with you, so these are your notes that we would take if I was there in person. All right, so then next, let's move on to example number 2, or practice problem number 2. All right, I have 2 and 6. So again, let's look at the smaller number. 2, we go see if we can divide into negative 6. Well, that gives me negative 3, right? So that's our greatest common factor. So we're going to put 2 here. All right, I have 8 to the third and a to the 1. So remember, we want the smallest one, so a to the 1 is smaller. All right, we start parentheses. Well, 2 divided by 2, that's 1, right? So I'm going to put 1 here. And if I have 3 a's and I take away one of them, then I'm just going to be left with a to the second. All right? Then we come over here, and again, divide by 2. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. All right? So then, if we have 1a and I take away that 1, I'm just going to be left with that. So now our final factored answer is 2a, parentheses, 1a to the second minus 3. Now another way you may see this written is 2a, parentheses, a to the second minus 3. Because remember in algebra, if it's a 1 in front of our letter or variable, we make it invisible. All right? So that's it for this video. So again, we may have 1 or 2 more videos depending on timing. I'm going to try to fit everything in another video so that way we don't have to worry about 3 videos. But if it does turn into 3 videos, then we'll be fine. Thank you, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.